Hello everyone, today we are build Soviet heavy tank KV-1 from Trumpeter. Let's do this! First of all, I decided to start with the turret, since it's the simplest element in the whole kit. And I need to say that I didn't run into any major issues during turret assembly. I can say that the biggest challenge was just cleaning the part of excess plastic. Overall, compared to the other kits I worked with, Trumpeter turned out to be pretty solid option for 1/72 scale. This turret has a ton of rivets, bolts and other small details where a wash will look just perfect. The build itself didn't take me much time, but unfortunately I still made a few mistakes. Though honestly, it wouldn't be me if I didn't. One thing I have to give the kit credit for, the gun barrel comes pre-drilled, so I didn't have to do that manually. And here is how the turret looks almost fully assembled. The only thing I hadn't decided at this point was whether I wanted to keep the hatch open or closed. So for now I moved on to working on the hull. There weren't many difficulties here. The hull is made of two pieces that just need to be glued together. The detailing on the hull is pretty decent, both on the chassis part and on the upper section. Just like with the turret, these elements will help create some cool highlights once it's time to paint. The only thing I didn't really like on the hull were the parts that hold the mat guards. Of course, there are versions of KV-10 where these uppers are shaped like triangles, but I wanted to make them hollow instead. So I grabbed my hobby knife and started cutting those parts off. A few minutes later, all the unwanted parts were cleanly removed. But the main question was, how do I get the result I want? To solve that, I found a thin clear plastic sheet and decided to cut out the pieces I needed from it. I needed some small strips, basically. So after just a few minutes, I ended up with some extra detailing, basically scratch build from junk. Honestly, I think the tank overall looks much nicer now. Plus, this approach gave me the option to add some gear like chains to hold the lock, or something like that. I can attach them to these new plastic strips, which wouldn't have been possible with the original kit parts. So I can say that was a good decision. And while I was talking about the process, I finished installing the right side parts. Now I just have to do the same on the left. All done! Now everything looks exactly the way I wanted. I might bend them a little during the process to give them a worn and damaged look. That kind of weathering always makes your model look better. At least in my case, it'll help create the effect I'm going for. Now there is just a bit left to do, gluing all remaining hull parts into place and finishing the hull assembly. Right now I'm attaching the tow lugs on the front part of the hull. These are used for towing tank itself or for when the tank is pulling out vehicle or equipment stuck in the mud, for example. After that I glued the machine gun mounted on the front of the tank. Now it's time to attach the front-facing parts, like the headlight and the horn. At least I think it's a horn. Hopefully I got that right. Next I'm installing the hooks that serve as holders for the tow cables. And a few words about tow cables in this kit. This kit includes rubber tow cables. I wasn't too keen in using them, so until the tank is placed in the diorama, the model will remain without tow cables. Later I plan to make a 3D model, which by the way you can find on my Calls 3D page. It is a set of Soviet World War II tow cables. I want to scatter those cables around the diorama, since the scene will depict an attempt to evacuate the tank. But the tricky part is, it's all happening during combat. Once I had all the final hull details in place, I decided to assemble the model, just to get a look at it, and figure out how I wanted to pose it. Because most of my previous models look pretty standard. Turret facing forward, no sense of movement, kind of boring if you ask me. I returned to the turret and glue it on the turret-mounted machine gun. But I did it upside down, so don't judge me too harshly. Yes, I realize it's wrong, but unfortunately I only noticed it during the painting stage. After working on the turret, I gave a bit of attention to the tank suspension. This time I wanted to assemble the suspension separately, to make painting easier and to simplify working on the whole. As you've seen in my previous videos, I used it to assemble the whole tank into one solid model and paint it that way. But honestly, this is not the most convenient method. And this time I realized there's a better way to do it. Then I returned to the turret again to glue on the hatch. Well, I corrected the hatch position on the turret and decided to reinforce it with superglue, since regular model glue couldn't hold it in place. With that I can say the turret is completely done, and it's time to get back to the tank's hull. I decided to add a bit of damage to the rear fenders by bending them slightly. That'll give the model a more worn look and, let's say, a bit more realism, if that word even applies here. After that I mounted the towing lugs on the rear of the tank. And with that, I would say the whole assembly is more or less complete. But we're still missing the storage boxes. I want to include some storage boxes, and I'd like to make one from scratch. This is roughly the layout I'm going for. I really like the pose, the way the turret is turned and the hatches are open. It'll add a bit of drama to the future diorama. Yo! As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to make it from scratch, in an open position, so you can peek inside and see the details in that part of the tank. Yes, I did try to make the original hatch openable, but like I said, the plastic was just too thick, and I basically destroyed the whole part. So instead, using the original part as a reference, I went with the same thin plastic I used for some of the custom hull details. After cutting the pieces to the right size, I began assembling them. I had to file down the sides of the box just a bit, but now they look much closer to the original storage box. After I glued on the front wall of the box, I realized it was first of all too tall, and second, it didn't sit flush with the side walls. This needed to be fixed, because otherwise the box wouldn't look right. Next, I had to work on the lid. After taking the necessary measurements, I started working on this part, and the first section of the lid was simply. After gluing it in place, I moved on to the second part. This part needed to be curved, and I wanted to make it open, so that the viewer could peek inside and see some tools lying in there. Bending it was actually very easy. I used my tweezers for that. Likely, they are perfect for the task. And this plastic holds its shape really well, which makes it a great choice for scratch building and modeling. Now I need to install the box at an angle, so it will be easier to see inside. Also, it still needs to be painted, so I have to make sure it's easy to access later. Overall, the box turned out quite well. Sure, it could be neater and cleaner, but the key thing here is functionality. And I think the functionality is solid. I also added some extra detail to this box, using the same thin plastic, hingers and a front panel where the handle attaches. Right now the tank looks like this. I like everything, the dynamic pose, the custom box, but it's still lacking some small details, like brackets and handles for the storage boxes, so I decided to fix that. The process is pretty straightforward. Using a fine drill bit, I made a few small holes and inserted thin wire to mimic handles. Here is the result I got so far. Overall, I am satisfied. I just need to add one more handle to the custom box, and voila! Now I need to return to the turret and add some extra detail. I want to apply weld seams to the turret. For that, I'll need a modeling knife. Since I've never done this kind of detailing before, I decided to make the weld small. just to avoid messing up the model. I want to see how it turns out and how it affects as a final look. The process, as you can see, is pretty simple. Just carve out the welding lines, then use some model glue to soften the texture slightly. And that's it. Following that technique, I added the necessary weld seams. I was happy with the result, and that means the model is ready for the next step, and this is my favorite part. Of course, I'm talking about painting. First, the model needs to be primed. As usual, I used my favorite Vallejo primer. Yes, it has a bit of a sheen, but it does its job really well, completely covering the model and giving it a uniform surface. Once the model was primed, I applied the first paint layer. That's 4BO by ACM, which I thinned heavily with water to make sure it reached all the recesses. Since this paint dries quickly, it's perfectly fine to apply it in a very thin consistency. This time I choose to use ACM paints because I want to give the model an ultra matte finish. And these paints are perfect for that. Then I added a bit of dectan to this color and made the upper parts of the tank a bit lighter, but just a little. The further work on highlighting and shading parts will be done using a brush and the sponge method. I made the base color even lighter and added a drying retarder. I apply small damage marks with a sponge across the tank hole. This isn't chipping yet, but it's a close step in the necessary weathering. This way you can make the paint look slightly worn, faded in some places and a bit more saturated in others. Yeah, of course I know about the distressing technique, but unfortunately I don't have the right resources to use it. And I really didn't want to use hairspray, because I don't have a good hairspray. And the one I used gave me an effect I didn't like at all. Here is how it looked after drying. In some areas the model looks slightly worn, in others more saturated, and in some there is a sun-faded effect. I think this gives my tank a great base before applying chipping. But before that I need to add a bit more light color, though not as saturated as before. A little more time and here is what I got. And of course now you can see a bunch of my cat's fur on this tank. And that means we are good to go. And honestly, that fur doesn't bother me, because fur can only be in the house of a happy person. Only a happy person has pets. Now, after making the paint even lighter, I apply proper chipping in some places. It might look like I overdid it, but don't worry, once I add rust and washes, this effect will be balanced out. Now it's time to add rust. There won't be much on this tank, but it will be there. For this I use a dark grey color and apply tiny dots in the place where rust should appear. This time I'm going light with rust, unlike in previous models. Those look like they'd been beaten with everything imaginable. This time I wanted to be more realistic, or at least acceptable. So, fellow modelers, don't point out my mistakes too hard. Then, when that was done, I mixed some lighter color and added highlights to all the corner and protruding parts of the model. I applied the same light strokes to the tank hole. Like I will say it 1001 times, I really like this effect. It makes the model look a bit cartoony, but at the same time add depth. Also, when using this method, don't forget about various rivets and other raised part of the tank. These light effects need to be applied absolutely everywhere possible. After that, I painted the engine deck grills and exhaust pipes with dark paint to prep them for the next step. And now we move on. This time again I am using an oil-based wash, but more carefully. I am not covering the entire model in oil paint, just gently applying it where accents are needed. All seams, rivets and other raised parts should have their fake shadows, so that the model looks more interesting, varied and, dare I say it, more professional. This process takes a long time, but as you can see from the rear part of the tank, it's worth it. First, it creates, as I said earlier, artificial shadows. Second, it gives the tank the appearance of a real combat vehicle. And I think this effect really working good, and I apply the same method to the turret. Here as well, all the rivets, raised areas and recesses need to have their shadows and accent. Here is what my tank looks like after drying. So far I'm happy with it, and now it's time to remove the excess. Which is pretty difficult, because the oil paint I used, lamp black, has a particular consistency that doesn't allow me to clean it off with the thinner I normally use. So I had to spend a lot of time removing the excess manually. But once I finished that, it was time to move on to rust. I watched the Night Shift channel and realized that you can create a cool rust effect using oil paints. So I decided to try it on my own models. After several stages of applying this effect, it gave me the result I was looking for. Now I can see both the rust and some weathering, because the mix of dark red and black creates a nice, dirty, grimy effect. Now it's time to move on to the running gear. On these parts I used the same black wash. And once it dried, I applied camouflage green mixed with Vorbio by ACM using the sponge technique across the entire running gear area. I think they look pretty cool. The only thing missing is a little rust effect, which I apply at the wash. Using this particular color helps create not just a rust, but also a dirt and dust effect. Now I leave the running gear to dry and switch to working on the next part. That, of course, is weathering of the lower hull. I am not entirely sure how to do it, this is my first time, but I'm doing my best. And yeah, right now it looks, let's say, rough. I basically applied oil paints and then use thinner and a brush to swipe it downward, simulating dripping dirt and dust. Once it dried, this is how it looks. But I definitely need to refine this effect and make it less harsh. Then I added a few more wash variants. The first one is a bit darker, meant to simulate the mix of engine oil and dirt, which should look darker. At least that's how I imagine it. Now this part of the tank needs to dry properly, before I apply the next effect. In the meantime, I decided to switch to simulating spilled fuel. For this I mixed black and dark brown paint. Using thinner, I began creating fuel puddles that spread out a bit. The effect turned out quite well, and I decided to apply it to all the areas of the tank where fuel might spill. Off camera, I painted the exhaust pipe using my standard method, but I slightly altered it this time. I painted exhaust pipes in light rust color, and then using dark rust and the sponge technique I applied additional layer of paint. After that I used black oil paint to create a soot effect, as Soviet tanks always have a lot of soot. But I think it's not enough, so using diluted acrylic paint and dry brushing technique I made this effect more expressive. And now I can say that this look good. Now I wanted to add more dust to the tank, so I mixed light ochre with white and started making a wash to simulate dust. This is how this effect looks after drying. The tank looked dirty, withered and a bit damaged in some places. Overall, it almost completely satisfied me, except for the decals I applied. Honestly, either I have clumsy hands, or these decals are just awful. But unfortunately I didn't have any other decals. The ones from other kits were simply too old. They disintegrated as soon as I touched them. I was really angry. I haven't been this frustrated with model working in a long time, but this just drove me mad. It's about time I figured something out and started making my own decals, so I can always have the right ones on hand. After spending a few hours with a paintbrush, I managed to give these decals the appearance you see now. Yes, using matte varnish I was able to slightly fix the situation, but I also had to use acrylic paint, which ruined some of the effect I had applied earlier to the turret, but I had no other choice. Now the tank's running gear is dry, so I can continue applying the next effect. The process is basically the same. This way I'll be able to add a bit of shade into the dust by applying oil paint to it. After that, I'll use the same light and dark washes and apply drops of paint. This will add variety to the appearance of the dirt and make it more interesting. I decided to apply the same effect to the bottom of the tank, as for once it needs some attention too, even though it won't be visible in the diorama. Now, while the tank is drying, and I can't show you this effect just yet, I decided to work on the wheels. Apply silver paint to them and bring them to the desired look. I did most of the work off camera, as working with the running gear on camera was unfortunately quite difficult. I haven't fully set up my workshop in the apartment yet, so I have to resort to these desperate measures. To tone down the brightness of the running gear, I applied a dark wash to smooth out the brightness a bit, while still keeping the necessary effect intact. Then it was time to paint the tank's tracks. These tracks are rubber. Their quality is pretty good. However, the painting process is quite simple. First I painted them in matte black, using an airbrush and ACM black. Next, I applied two washes. One in the form of rust, and the other to simulate dust, a bit of dirt and clay. Overall, it blends well with the tank and I am completely satisfied with it. And now I need to apply wear effect, especially to the areas that frequently contact the track and the ground. And then the work on the tracks will be done. They look good and it's time to install them on the model. I did most of the work on the track off camera because it's extremely inconvenient, and that's one of the major downsides of rubber tracks. They are quite particular, to say the least. Well, I'm generally happy with the work done. Everything looked pretty much how I wanted. I truly believe that this tank will definitely not spoil my future diorama. I also thought the tank looks dirty, but there isn't any grass, leaves or anything like that to break up the monotony of the dirty tank. For this, I used very fine flocking material, cut it even finer and just sprinkled it over the model. Using a brush, I spread the effect around a bit to make it look more realistic. Then I fixed it in place with heavily diluted matte varnish. After that, I will cover model with another layer of matte varnish, to ensure these small details don't peel off the model. While the model is drying, I am working on additional details. Yes, this tank will have some extra equipment, but I decided to paint it separately to make working with it more convenient. The first item is an ammo box. This is a very simple model that I printed on my 3D printer. Fortunately, its specifications are sufficient for such a small model. By the way, you can also get it on Cal 3D for a symbolic price. You'll find the link in the description of this video. Painting the box is very simple. Base color first, then wear effect and of course some work with washes, because I poorly set up my camera and it's quite difficult to film. After working with these details, I found a few small racks in my supplies, which I made from leftover milliput. This is actually very convenient. If you mix it too much extra material, you can easily make starp or small racks that you can later add to your diorama or model. It's really a handy trick. Now all these details are ready to be fixed to the model. I decided to place the red rack on the right wing of the tank, as this area was almost completely empty and needed some detailing. The green tarp was placed on the left side of the tank, and the tools were placed in their box. This is exactly what this detail was created for, to show the tools sticking out the box. These tools you can also download from my Cal 3D page. The fuel canister also went into the box, since its bottom didn't print well on the 3D printer, so I had to place it there. Overall, this is what I will end it up with. I can say everything on this tank is perfect. Yeah, there are many positive aspects, but there are also quite a few negative ones. And we mustn't forget that we should enjoy the process of working on the model. And I truly enjoyed working on this one. Overall, this kit is worth it, and if you want to try assembling a Soviet KV tank, the Trumpeter kit is not that expensive, and in terms of price and quality, it's quite reasonable. And that's it, my friend. Please feel free to leave your critics and advice, I really value all of it, as I often use the tips I get, and that's awesome. That's what our modeling community is for. I also want to say huge thanks to all my subscribers and everyone who comments and like my videos. Special thanks to those who support me on Patreon and my Calls 3D page. And thank you guys for using my models, it's really cool, I can say. Of course, the money doesn't play a huge role, but it allows me to buy new kits, and that's pretty cool. Once again, thanks everyone for watching. If you like this video, give me a thumb up. If you don't, give it a dislike. It's only your choice. Whether you subscribe or not, it's up to you, but I hope you enjoyed watching this video, or at least had a laugh at my mistakes. In any case, thank you again for watching and see you soon. Bye bye!